Hello and welcome to everyone on the line. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar, An Action Plan for Next Generation Fibers. This webinar is the second in our series, Red, White, and What's New in Responsibly Made Fashion, and was organized by the United States Fashion Industry Association, representing brands, retailers, importers, and wholesalers based in the U.S. and doing business globally, as well as our friends at Lensing. My name is Shannon Brady, Communications Coordinator at USFIA. Before we begin, I just wanted to review a couple technical points for today's webinar. The first is that questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question header on your webinar control panel, type your text into the box, and hit send. Our presenters will address as many questions as possible at the end of the program. And if for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. A quick reminder that all attendees will receive a follow-up email later today with a copy of the slide deck and a recording of today's session. So without further delay, I'd like to hand the floor over to USFIA President Julia Hughes to kick us off.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion with companies in the forefront of textile circularity. And there's no better day for this conversation than today, World Circular Textiles Day. The next generation of fibers are looking to alternative resources to develop sustainable circular product. Think recycled garments, post-industrial, and post-consumer waste. In this conversation, key innovation leaders will share their different approaches to developing the next generation of fibers, discuss their goals, and how mills and brands can support circularity. So let me welcome our very special presenters for today's webinar. Our moderator will be Nicole Rycroft, founder and executive director at Canopy. We also will be hearing from Patrick Lundstrom, CEO at RenewCell, Dilip Gaur, Managing Director, Pulp and Fiber Business with Burla, and Tricia Carey, Director, Global Business Development, Lensing AG, and our partner for this series. So I'm going to pass over control now to Nicole Rycroft, our moderator, who will introduce herself and provide an overview of Canopy's work in the fashion industry as we get started today. So thank you. The floor is yours, Nicole.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie, and thanks to everybody for joining us, including our esteemed panelists. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to be your tour guide for the next 60 minutes as we dive into this kind of really dynamic field, which is around accelerating climate solutions and the action plan that there is for commercial scale production of these next gen alternatives. If we can move to the next slide, that'd be great. So a quick introduction to Canopy. We're a solutions-driven NGO. We work to protect the world's forests, species, and climate, and help advance community rights. We do this by harnessing the power of the marketplace. And so we work collaboratively with about 750 large corporate customers of the forest products industry. We help these companies, these large consumers of paper and packaging and wood-based fabrics like rayon and viscose. We help them to develop cutting-edge environmental policies and then to engage with their suppliers to implement those policies to, stop logging in endangered species habitat, to actually secure on-the-ground conservation, and to expedite and accelerate these innovative solutions. And so for the next 8 to 10 minutes, I'll give you a bit of an overview of some of the changes that have been happening within the fashion industry over the last number of years, and this exciting moment that we're at in terms of the transition to next generation solutions and circular textiles. And then we will have a really kind of, I think, interesting and engaging conversation with our panelists, who are all leaders in this space. Historically, Canopy has worked to green the Harry Potter book series and the book industry more broadly next. And more recently, we've been working in the fashion industry. And Canopy Style is focused on transforming the viscose supply chain to ensure that man-made cellulosic fabrics like rayon and viscose and modal do not become entrenched drivers of deforestation or forest degradation. And there are currently 150 million trees that disappear into rayon and viscose fabrics every year, and that is slated to double within the next decade. And so it's a really exciting juncture in this industry and supply chains development, in that it's at a scale inflection point. And so it's a really interesting point in time for us to be having this conversation as an industry. We'll go next. Over the past 7 years, canopy style has literally gone from 0 to 320. We've become one of the fastest moving environmental initiatives in the apparel space, and that's really thanks to our fantastic brand partners. So there are 320 brand partners that represent about $580 billion in annual revenues that all have canopy style commitments in place. That means that they're committed to not sourcing from ancient and endangered forests, to working alongside of their peers and their suppliers and canopy to help conserve those landscapes, as well as to kickstart commercial scale production of these next generation solutions. And you can see giants of the industry like H&M and Zara and Amazon and Target, iconic brands like Levi's and The Gap, as well as pace setters like Stella McCartney and Eileen Fisher. And we can go to the next. That was a good spoiler alert there, Shannon. And because there's been a consistent message from brands that they're wanting to shift out of sourcing from ancient and endangered forests, we have seen similar commitments from viscose producers that represent 85% of global production. Now, of course, making a commitment and actually making it a reality, there's a lot of work that happens between that. And so to help brands be able to assess which viscose producers are actually really bringing integrity and leadership to their environmental commitments, Canopy produces a hot button ranking every year of leading producers. I would be remiss if I wasn't to note the leadership on the part of both Aditya Birla and Lenzing within the producer space. So within hot button, those producers that are at low risk of sourcing from ancient and endangered forest and or are showing in significant environmental leadership are attributed a green shirt. Those that are at risk and or documented of sourcing from high carbon and high biodiversity value forests have red in their shirt. And last year, we had just over 40% of global viscose production attributed with green shirts. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, because in the last week of October, we'll have the 2020 hot button out. And I'll just say that there's going to be more than 40% of viscose supply chain verified with green shirts. So keep your eye out for that as well. Next, so what we're seeing with the viscose supply chain is really, like, in the last 7 years, we've gone from 0 to more than 40% being verified at low risk or significant leadership in this space. And that's exactly the scale and the pace of change that we need to be seeing globally. We're all aware of the headlines. Anybody who's read a scientific journal over the past 5 years has probably also reached for a bottle of wine at the same time. They're sobering results. Our climate's warming faster than expected. We share this planet with 68% less animals than we did in the 1970s. And so, the science is clear that this is a turnaround decade for our planet, as well as, next slide, for humanity, where 75% of new diseases are crossing the human-animal barrier. And as we disturb and disrupt intact forest landscapes, we are unleashing these pathogens that we have absolutely no resistance to, be it Ebola or COVID or SARS or MERS. If we move to the next slide. So protecting forest ecosystems is about stabilizing the health of our planet, but it's also critical to ensuring the health of humanity. Forests are attributed to be at least 30% of the climate solution. They are habitat to 80% of the terrestrial species that we share this planet with. And so the scientific community are very clear that we need to protect and conserve 30 to 50% of the world's forests by 2030. Now, perhaps not surprising, that's quite a stretch from where we are now. And so it's going to require, that scale of change is going to require the transformation of damaging, extractive, linear industries, if we move to the next slide. And so recognizing that, Canopy has mapped out a blueprint for change in the pulp, paper, packaging, and viscose supply chains. It's called Survival, a pulp thriller, because who doesn't like a good thriller in the middle of the week? And this plan maps out, if we move to the next slide, how we can basically take 50% of the wood fiber that is currently used in pizza boxes and wrappings and t-shirts, and how we can replace that with lighter circular alternatives. Alternatives like, move to the next slide, agricultural residues that are currently burnt, waste textiles that are currently landfilled, or microbial cellulose that can be grown on food waste. In nature, there's no such thing as waste. And so part of this transition and transformation is the way that we actually think about the resources that are available to us and what is actually an opportunity for inclusion back into the supply chain. Next slide. And so we mapped where these fibers were available. We kind of had the scientific targets of where we need to be for a stable climate and biodiversity in mind. And then we mapped back where this fiber is available. And then we mapped where the mills, the new mills that need to be built that will use straw as their feedstock and waste textiles as their feedstock rather than trees. And this is the scale of infrastructure build that we need to be embarking on over the next 10 years. And so it's definitely an ambitious plan, but it's very pragmatic. As you may have noted in the earlier slide, there's a $69 billion price tag that comes with it, which may seem a little audacious. It's certainly more than I have in my bank account at the moment. But then we found out that the company that sells Botox sold for $68 billion in 2018. And if you just add an extra $1 billion onto that, it seems like a really good investment when it comes with saving the planet. And so that's the kind of change that we're really looking at if we move to the next slide. Now, of course, to make this kind of transformation happen, it's going to require all of us. It requires civil society, brands, producers, investors, journalists, disruptive technology, entrepreneurs to all be leaning in and activating all of the purchasing and investment and influence that we have with us. It requires us to basically put the days of sourcing from high carbon and biodiverse forests behind us. Unfortunately, this week we've had a report come out of Indonesia of deforestation in Borneo being linked to one of the world's, two of the world's largest viscose producers. But hopefully we need to be putting those days behind us and really looking forward. And I think it's really apropos that this is the very first World Recycled Textiles Day. We need to be enabling the transition to next-gen solutions, participating in pilots, supporting next-gen disruptive, game-changing technologies come to market, supporting those producers that are bringing those technologies to market first. We move to the next slide. And of course, if we're going to achieve the scale of change, then business as usual is not really going to get us there. And so we need to, be willing to stretch and explore different ways of doing things, providing and incentivizing suppliers to conserve forest landscapes, finding a way to encourage governments to create enabling conditions and policies for next generation solutions and conservation. And then last slide. And then of course, there's no single company that can do this by themselves. This does actually require all of us to lean in. This requires collective action. And after decades of process around trying to address climate change, I think now is really the time for us to be leaning in on timelined and outcome-focused change vehicles, and to be looking at things like next generation solutions and conservation in a pre-competitive space. And go to the next slide. So next generation solutions, it sounds a little science fiction-y, but these solutions are here today. They're viable. This model is in fact dressed in jeans and a top that come from waste textiles. I believe the top is actually a textile containing biola fiber, and the jeans contain lensing fiber. These solutions are not only sexy, as the tagline goes here, but also viable and here today. And so what we need to do now is scale these solutions. And so all three of our panelists today are playing really important roles in making this a reality. And so with that context, I'm going to transition this next part of the conversation over to our panelists. And before each of you speak, I know that Julie gave us all a quick introduction at the top end, but if you'd like to introduce yourselves as you answer, then that would be great. If you want to throw in what your favorite forest animal is alongside of that, then feel free. But I have 5 questions that I'll pose to each of you, and with a rotation of who responds first. You'll have 2 minutes to respond. Anybody who tuned into the VP debate last night will see this as a familiar format, but I'll just say that perhaps unlike Susan, that Shannon actually does have the ability to sort of drop the mic on any of us if we go over time. So, and then once we've gone through these pre-prepared questions, then we'll move on to the questions that all of you have. So please feel free to pop those through. So, Patrick, we're going to start with you, and then we'll move to Tricia and Dilip on this question. So with this context as a backdrop, let's talk about how each of your companies is currently developing next generation solutions. So if you could sort of explain or kind of share with us a little bit about what your priorities are for the next 6 to 12 months, what we should be keeping an eye on, both in terms of products that you think will be going to market during this time, and or any of the other foundational elements related to accelerating these solutions.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks for having me. I'm Patrick Lundström. I'm CEO of Renewcell. Renewcell is a company based in Sweden, and we are making dissolving pulp out of 100% recycled textile. So to answer your question there is that we're scaling up. We have had a lot of very interesting and positive launches. We have also produced throughout the value chain, the industrial value chain with our materials, and now we are scaling up. As a matter of fact, last week, Friday, I signed an agreement with a forestry company here in Sweden that we will build on their site. So we're going to build the next 60,000 metric ton plant, and we are now in the midst of doing the financing of that plant. So next 12 months, we will do a lot of constructing, and we will start up the next plant at first half of 2022. And in addition to that, just to keep your eyes open, we're going to have a lot of launches, more launches than we did with Levi's and H&M, but also other brands that are coming on stream that are working with our materials. So I think it's going to be a very, very exciting year and a very exciting couple of years, because this next plant is just going to be the first one of several that we have in the pipeline.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. Tricia, how about lensing? What's on the books?
Great. Yeah, so my name is Tricia Carey, and I handle global business development. I'm based in New York. I work with the US retailers and brands and manage our team that is in business development and marketing. We have a lot going on right now. Actually, so currently we produce Tencel lyocell with refever technology. That utilizes 30% post-industrial and post-consumer mixed pulp. And that is blended with our wood pulp that is certified and controlled pulp. And what we do is we process on the lyocell production system, because there you have a closed loop where 99.5% of the solvent is reused. We also add a fiber identification into that solvent, so we're able to have transparency and traceability, which we see as being very important for brands going forward. We started in 2017, so we've been at this for quite some time, for 3.5 years. And we started with retail partners, Levi's, Patagonia, and Inditex, specifically Zara. We are now at a point where we've had over 25 brands in apparel and in home that have utilized Refibra. And we work with 75 spinners, about 55 denim mills, and 40 knitters who are currently using Refibra in their developments. So we have quite an extensive network within supply partners who've been able to commercialize Refibra technology. And coming up in the next 6 to 12 months, you'll see more where we're working with partners. So this is partnerships from pulp straight through to brands. We have new programs that are coming that will be launching, especially this fall. We're working on our GRS certification. That's another area. And we're looking to scale to our vision of having 50% post-consumer waste by 2024, which we can talk about further.
Right.
So those are some of the things that are happening for us in using Refibra technology.
Great, thanks, Trisha. And then Dilip, how about for you?
Thank you, Nicole. It's not easy to come last. I think everything has been spoken. But anyway, my name is Dilip Gaur, and I'm the CEO for the Pulp and Fiber Business of Aditya Birla Group. For people who do not know, Aditya Birla Group is a $48 billion group which works in 35 countries. We are amongst the top 3 pulp and fiber producers in the world, and give a full range of products in viscose, starting from modal, lyocell, recycled fiber, dope dyed fiber, and a lot of specialties. What we have done is put sustainability at the core of our business strategy, and I think and the next generation fiber is the key building block for this strategy. What we have done in last 12 months is developed our own technology to recycle the textile waste on a lab scale, scaled up to a pilot plant of 2 tons per day, and now done a commercial plant of 27 tons per day. And we now have a product with 20% incorporation of recycled fiber, and we are soon going to take trials with further increase in the incorporation. What you can look for in the next 12 months is, I think we are going to launch our own collection with the recycled fiber in the next 12 months. And second, as Nicole said, it's no one industry and one company can find a solution to this whole big issue, which is a must-win battle for the fashion industry. We are promoting industry collaboration through a project we have just launched with Fashion for Good, along with PVH and Kering and lot of new multiple innovators. And the idea is to create an ecosystem so that we do a rapid scale up of this, because what has required is not only technology but the rapid scale up. And third is, what we are doing is, the success of this whole project depends upon how well the supply chain of waste textile is established, and we are doing a lot of work on that. There are 3 or 4 areas where we are right now focused, and the idea is to go to 40% capability of incorporation in next 12 months, and then I think try further on that. That's what we are doing.
Great, thank you. And I want to pick up actually on one of the pieces that you just mentioned, actually, Dilip, which is around that kind of back end sort of part of the supply chain that needs to be built out. And I know that this is something also that Patrick and Trisha, you've been grappling with as well. And so with Survival, a pulp thriller, we've kind of taken those targets and then we translated them across into Canopy style next generation vision that has a number of brands. I think it's like 30 plus brands and producers who have lent and kind of lent their names and signed on to that. And within the vision, there are very set targets to really kind of signpost the scale of change that we're hoping to achieve collectively over the course of the next 12 months to 10 years. And so within that vision, there's a call to action for 50% of man-made cellulosics to be of next generation solution feedstock by 2030. And so if we start with Trisha this time, and then Dilip, you're next, and Patrick, what is your sense of the pieces that need to fall into place for us to make that leap from where we are today to there?
Yes, and I think, I've started to see that over working with Refibra technology for the past 3.5 years of what's really needed as we've commercialized it. And as I mentioned, our vision at Lensing, which we publicly stated last year, is to be at 50% post-consumer waste by 2024. So, it's coming very quickly. What we feel needs to happen in order for us to really move forward is based on 3 things: education, commitments, and legislation. So education, and this is where, starting in 2017, talking about textile recycling, it was really new conversations that brands were having. And we found that we spent so much time educating just around textile to textile circularity, what chemical recycling is. This is where we were having to start with those conversations than even being able to talk about our product first. So I feel strongly around education, and that's actually why, we initiated this conversation today and, suggested with USFIA to have us here together, because I think it's important for brands to know what questions do they need to ask, how we're all developing differently, towards this goal. And as you said in the beginning, Nicole, it's about collective action to get there. The second point around commitments, and this is where it's great, the commitments of the brands. We need to have this happen faster. We need to have stronger, measurable commitments from the brands that we really can move this forward. I see that that's very important. And also commitments from, our partners, from mills and spinners to continue to innovate using our products. So commitments are essential. And third is around legislation. And here we see we need to move the needle. And if you look at what's been done in other industries, for example, California just last month for plastic bottles has legislation right now by 2022, 15% recycled content within plastic bottles, and to go to 50% by 2030. And we need to have legislation because we need to have those incentives, whether it's legislation on setting certain standards or also on tax incentives that could exist. So why should Refibra made with lyocell technology be taxed at the same rate as viscose? So we need to start to differentiate our materials in the market, and we need the support of legislation on that.
Great, thanks, Tricia.
That's where I see it.
And I know in the paper field, we saw an incredible increase in recycled paper production when the US government put in place a minimum 30% target for any kind of government purchasing. So those kinds of, tax and financial incentives, as well as just sheer sort of like minimum sort of performance targets are really critical in shifting the dial. Dilip, what are your thoughts in terms of the pieces?
I think we believe that transforming the textile value chain to a circular economy goes well beyond the product and technology. I think that's required, but it's more about removing the barriers to scale up. What is important is the scaling, and scaling will decide how successful this industry is. And I think what I believe there's 3 or 4 things we need to do well. One is the seamless collaboration across the value chain between the brands, the innovators, the fiber manufacturers, and supply chain guys. Because I think it has to go beyond the transactional level interaction. It has to be a what I call a shared risk and reward relationship. You will have to have skin in the game every part of the supply chain. If that doesn't happen, you can't bring around transformation. The second, I think, is textile industry is a bit late in this whole recycle game. If you look at the other industries, evolved a lot. Go to metals, like I said, cans, beverage cans. 70% of the cans get recycled in the world. Go to countries like Brazil, 99% get recycled. And what is important is getting the supply chain right, because the cost can go up 2.5 to 3x in the supply chain itself, because collection, sorting, segregating, homogenizing the feed, removing is not an easy job. It's very labor intensive. So I think we as stakeholders in this whole initiative have to work in creating a very efficient and responsive supply chain. And third is to co-create products with recycled fiber, because they are not going to be same as what you make from virgin fiber. They may have same performance, but they may not look the same. And I think we need to reset the consumer expectations. So the brand and the we'll have to work together. To my mind, if these 3 or 4 things we get right, we will be able to scale up this whole innovation much faster. And speed of scale up is what decides the success of the industry.
Great, thanks, Dilip. Very clear. And I think we're going to come back to that last point that you just mentioned in the last question a little bit. Patrick, how about you? What do you see as the critical elements?
Well, I agree with both Dilip and Trisha here. We need scale, as I see it. I think the technologies also need to be developed a little bit more. We have within Renewcell, we have made the technology work, but we can't do it alone. I mean, this is a huge market, and it needs to be more companies working with recycling. And with that, I think also there has to be a little bit of a call to the brands to design for circularity. I mean, as you mix fibers and so forth, it becomes more and more difficult to recycle those fibers. But also that is within the commitment from the brands to design for circularity. But also the beauty of this is that for the brands that do the transition, they have the consumers in their hands, and they can protect their brand values. The ones that will not move in this direction, they have a huge risk, and in order to deteriorate their brand values. The other thing I think needs to be in place is also policies for collection of textiles. The same way as we collect bottles and cans and paper and so forth, we also need to have those systems in place for textiles. I think in general, the communication from brands and with brands and also from us, we need to help the brands to tell the story, because it's very difficult being a brand and just saying, well, right now I'm circular, but what about all your other products? So we're also trying to help out with the marketing around the circularity, which we do with our brand name Circulose. I think there is a lot of things that needs to be done, and I also call for other companies to come into this space. And of course, we need also the financing of building these capabilities. So there is a lot of things that are under the move, but I think very positively we will be able to get to the 50% within this decade. I mean, Circulose is 100% recycled already, so why couldn't we?
Exactly. Never say never. That's always my adage in life. I think building off some of the comments that you've all already made, I want to pivot a little bit. I know that we've all spoken about it like directly during this conversation even, but I've definitely had some lengthy conversations with at least 2 of you about this in the past, and kind of the road to harvesting the closet. And so I think, Dilip, your observation that the fashion industry or kind of like textiles is behind other sectors, paper recycling, aluminium recycling. So this pathway to actually harvesting the closet for the next generation of fiber has some challenges, obviously, that like a single company, as we've all referenced, can't kind of tackle successfully by themselves. But what do you think the issues are, and how do you think we can overcome them, both in terms of, and feel free to speak both to things that your company's doing individually, as well as kind of collaborations that you see as being needed?
I think the single word which is important for this is the collaboration, and I think we can't overemphasize collaboration and like Tricia said, communication. These 2 things are very, very important part of the whole exercise, and we need to reimagine a few things. So a collaboration in terms of, we need to reimagine the business model. I think the whole business model is one of boundaryless collaboration rather than segmental focus, that I do my manufacturing job, somebody else does the innovation job, and we aggregate together. It won't work. It has to be interactive, interdependent process. The second, I think, is very, very important is I come back to the word about scaling all the time. We have to redefine the circularity standards. Sometimes we get too carried away by percentage, like 50%, 70%, 80%. But that may come at the cost of lower throughput. So there may be a trade-off between maybe a 45% fiber can process 2 times more productively than 50% fiber. So the industry has to be open to revisiting those trade-offs. So as the technology evolves, as there are more impure fibers get mixed up, it may well turn out that there is a threshold beyond which the productivity drops significantly. So we may have to be prepared for that. So I think that is something which we need to do that. And I think third is reimagining the LCA measurement, because what gets measured gets controlled. There's a lot of gap between how you define LCA. What is the scope of LCA? Do I start from cradle to grave? Do I start from somewhere in between? What do I do? Is that, do we include the sequestering by forest as a part of my LCA? Do I do not do it? At the end of the day, you must go by the spirit of the whole thing. You want to minimize the greenhouse gas emission. So do I start from the fossil fuel when it comes out of the oil, or do I start from intermediate product? So I think we need to set very clear standards about the scope and measurement of LCA. That will lead to a very right solutions for the industry. Otherwise, there are a lot of segmental and suboptimal solutions are coming. And fourth, I go back again, is I think let's understand we need to create products which recognize the reality without compromising functionality of the end product. You have to make sure that we do not try to mimic what we are currently using, because it is not that all human beings are not alike, but they are different, but they are still equally good. So they can be a textile which looks a little different but can be as effective. You must understand a recycled fiber product may be a little different, but will still deliver you same look and feel, same experience. So I think these are 3 or 4 things which you need to work collaboratively and create a package for the industry, which will lead to a whole transformation. I think we are not talking about incremental change. We're talking about transforming the way we look at textiles. That's what I'm
exactly,
and that's what my focus is.
Yeah, these are not tinkering around the edges. This is a dramatic shift. Patrick, how about you? What are your perspectives on this?
Well, if we just take the words harvesting the closet, again, I think I already said it before, but I think the design for circularity is important. The other one is the collection of waste, of course, but what I'd like to talk a little bit more about here is that to make this happen, we need a lot of investments. And that means investments from us. We're putting a lot of investments into this, but it also means to leave a little bit of money on the table for the rest of the value chain, so that we don't create, that we're going out with products so expensive that, let's say, nobody's starting to use it. And that's another barrier. So we need to ensure that what we sell from us is affordable throughout the value chain, and everybody earns a little bit more. So being generous in that sense. The other thing is, again, on investments, is that we need to drum up the financing community. And the finance community is starting to see that sustain tech is something very interesting to invest in. I have seen it over the last quarters, how it just becomes crazy on the interest in a company like RenewCell. We also have a responsibility in sustain tech to show investors that what we do does not only benefit a few and is not very profitable. We need to show that investment in sustain tech creates value, because then we get more investors going in and wanting to invest in sustain tech, and that drives a huge responsibility for us being in sustain tech. So we need to bring out more of those success stories. This is the decade of change. If we don't change and get more sustain tech companies up and running and doing the transition, we're going to be where we were 2019 and 2010. So the creation of profitable, beautiful, very value creating sustain tech companies, that will drive investors in there. It will also drive the entrepreneurs and the brilliant minds into this space. We will not change the environment with another IT app, like a new game or a new other fintech application. We need to get all of that interest into sustain tech to make a change.
Yeah, and I think that's where both, mainstream producers like Lenzing and Biller are obviously already playing a role. You know, I know at Canopy, we've been working in the investment space to create a pooled fund and have strategic letters of interest to purchase that are in the hundreds of thousands of tons to help de-risk these kinds of innovative financing vehicles. Tricia, don't want to leave you out of jumping into this. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, harvesting your closet is basically, you know, now our raw material supplier is the consumer instead of, you know, using trees. And that's just a totally different way of working. And we have to get out of the mindset that we are a supply chain, because a supply chain is only, I'm a fiber producer selling to a yarn spinner. And this is where we have to think more as a supply network. And it was really when we started, you know, working with some of the organizations that we saw the missing holes in our supply network. And specifically, you know, we're working with Accelerating Circularity Group, which released their report on Tuesday about, you know, how we could map supply chains. Because now we have to look at how are we getting from the consumer's closet back into processing, and who are the collectors and sorters to do that. And as the other panelists have already said, you know, it's about designing into circularity. We need to know what dyes are being used, what other treatments are being used for these textiles. So it's much broader than just saying we're a supply chain. We're really a supply network in doing that. And I do also agree it's on the investment that needs to happen, as you identified in your report, Nicole. If it's $69 billion, but these are long-term investments, not short-term. And that's where the industry has to look at this differently. This isn't something quick that you run for a season. It's not a one-off group. This is something you have to integrate in, and these long-term investments that need to happen in order for the technology to be there in order to scale this up. And so, you know, what I've found over the past 3.5 years is again, the brands want everything cost neutral. They want more and more and more. And as Patrick was saying, you know, we have to be able to work together through our supply network that it's healthy for everyone. But, you know, right now it seems like the innovation and the burden lies more on all of us sitting right here in this conversation. So how do we balance that out more within the supply network?
Great, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to remind us all, let's see if we can do it in 90 seconds rather than 2 minutes with our responses.
We're so passionate about it, Nicole. It's hard.
And I do not want to sort of bridle that passion and enthusiasm, but I do want to allow time for folks to be able to ask questions. So just quickly, and I think, you know, most of you have spoken to this already, but obviously 2020 has been a curveball of a year. And so there's been a lot of upheaval. It comes on the, you know, the fact that there have been for the last 2 years now, millions of young people out on the streets calling for climate action from those of us that are, you know, have voting age and in decision-making roles. And then COVID has obviously led to significant social and economic shifts and upheaval. And so given this year, how has that changed your business plans or outlook, or has it? And where is sustainability and next generation solutions sitting within your companies and your priorities in this post-COVID rebuild that we're likely to see? And I think you've all spoken to this a little bit, so maybe we can move through this question a little faster. Patrick, Tricia, and Dilip will be the order for this one.
Sure. Well, if anything, it has actually accelerated the shift to next-gen materials for us. We had a launch with H&M just in the beginning of the COVID, so all the physical things were cancelled, but it just took off on the web and so forth, and we didn't have to travel for it. So I haven't seen a diminished interest. On the contrary, now when we're out of the COVID, it's more of an acceleration of interest of people wanting to change.
Great. And
yeah, also we've seen an increase. I think the pandemic pause has allowed some companies to stop and organize. For lensing, also, we increased our commitment around circular initiatives. We actually have one staff member who is working on projects specifically. So now to have someone who's head of circular initiatives is also big within lensing to coordinate. And then from the brand side, similar to what Patrick was saying, we see more interest from the brand. We have one customer who's increased their amount of Refibra 3 times as much. So I'm very encouraged by that. We have some new launches. We do see a lot of activity within the denim industry. They seem to understand the most how to work with Refibra technology. So we continue to see more increases, and even within the industry, more collaborations. Today being the first, World Circular Textiles Day. I mean, this is really the time. So we only see an increase.
And Dilip, you already spoke to this being central tenet, but
I think there's one observation I would like to make, that this pandemic has impacted the people's psyche in a very different way. But when it comes to the sustainability, I think it has reinforced the faith. I believe people have become more conscious about sustainable products and solutions, because I think what they believe is the company which espouses and invests in sustainability are the ones they can trust more. And the consumer trust got shaken up because of pandemic. So I think, to my mind, there's a whole faith on sustainability has gone up post-pandemic. And at Birla, our company, I mean, everything is going at a faster rate. Like Patrick and Tricia said, I think we are spending $170 million on EU BAT compliance. It's still happening. They're investing in the zero liquid discharge project, which is still happening. A big investment we are making, and we have started a full-scale next-gen project with Fashion for Good during the pandemic. That shows the commitment we have, so that we started right in the middle of the pandemic. So I believe it will accelerate and not slow down, to my mind.
right. And so part of this is, like a shift in priorities. I think, Tricia, your point around, like with the setting pause, our experience at Canopy has been that there's actually been a doubling down on sustainability, and if anything, we're seeing it kind of really further strengthened in terms of being a commitment and it, becoming a stronger commitment within senior management. But if we obviously, fashion is a very kind of public interfacing sector, and if we look forward and at more of a consumer level, with kind of the Gen Z that are known to be seeking experiences, engagement in the web through both, like with their physical experiences as well as their purchasing. They want value, and they're redefining what that is, and they're very conscious. And many of the people that are, out on the streets with the school strike program. What do you think it's going to take for consumers to really effectively engage in this transition of the textile industry to circularity? And for this one, we'll start with you, Tricia.
Yeah, I have 2 in-house Gen Z that are my testing ground all the time. And they learn everything from Instagram. That is their news feed, is Instagram. So I think, how we can communicate more on social media is important. I think your Waste Not, Want Not program was great. Lensing has done a campaign over the past several years called Make It Feel Right. And this campaign has had over 90 million views. So I think this is the type of investment that we have, to get consumers to think about knowing what their garments are made of. And that was the purpose of the campaign, to ask those questions, to understand. But I think on another level, we also need to make it easy access for consumers. And as Patrick had mentioned, is it how easy can we make textile recycling? How easy can we, bring this awareness of bring your garments to a center, or what can be done for reusing? So I see it, the strength of social media and the storytelling, and what we need to do overall as an industry to make it easy for recycling.
Great, thanks. And Dilip?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Tricia. I think it's all about communication. This generation is wanting to, and is very, very positive towards sustainability. But I think what we need to do is a communication which they can relate to. Like I always say, when you tell them that, look, if you wear this T-shirt made out of a sustainable fiber, you save so much of water which could have fed 200 poor household. I think it makes a big impact. So to my mind, the way we tailor make the communication for the young generation they can relate to. And second, I think they like fact-based communication. So be frank, and even if there are some shortcomings, let's go up front and say we have a plan, this is how we'll do it. I think they appreciate it. And third is, I think when it comes to demanding from them, we should be very clear about that. I think we should spell out the both ways. It's a two-way process. And I think the generation Z doesn't mind that. If we expect a behavior from them, let's just demand it, and it works. To my mind, it's all about a 360 degrees communication. It should be done well.
Great.
Digital will play a key role in that. Yeah.
They are communicators for sure.
Yeah.
And Patrick, any additional thoughts before we?
Well, I think Jen said is doing a great job because they're keeping us all on toes, right? They have the right to do it. The future is theirs. And what actually resonates in my mind with Generation Z is effective storytelling. They generate and regenerate their identity all the time, you know, through various digital medias. So they respond to compelling narratives, and recycling is a compelling narrative. So I think we have all opportunities of arranging that we get next gen materials out there, and that they understand and they buy into that. But also they need to understand what's in the shops. So all of us, I think it's important that we bring the story. We also are communicating in the store so people can actually make the choice that not to go for the garments that are not recycled, but to go for the garments that are recycled. And the last point is, I think if we're going to get the big masses to use recycled materials, those recycled materials need to have the same quality as other clothes. Otherwise, we're going to have some die-hard 1% that make the change, and that will not change. That will not make the big difference that we need. So I think there is a couple of things in there that Jen said is bringing, and you know, I love what these guys are doing. These kids are really keeping us on toes. I mean, I've also have a couple of them at home, and they keep me at toes. You know, love it.
Nothing like the breakfast table to keep us honest. Yeah, and I think that was definitely part of the impetus behind Canopy's Waste Not, Want Not, or Solutions Are Sexy campaign, was to really showcase that, you know, we're not talking about potato sacks. We're talking about stylish fabrics that are, you know, you kind of like that hit the performance marks as well. Shannon, I'm conscious that we've kind of eaten in a little bit to the audience's Q&A, but I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you all for a really exciting discussion. We are now going to turn to our audience for question and answer. We'll start with those submitted during the live broadcast, but you're welcome to continue submitting questions using your dashboard. And our first question is, what amounts of energy are required to break down these fabrics and fibers in consumer waste? Are you evaluating the carbon footprint of these technologies? In other words, are we saving trees but burning more oil and fossil fuels to reuse these materials?
So I know that I have a response about that, but I mean, maybe I can kick off with that. We were on the advisory committee of an LCA, a life cycle analysis that Stella McCartney commissioned last year. It used cutting edge LCA kind of approach. Very clearly shows, with looking at the full life cycle, including the biogenic carbon of a tree being logged and the carbon loss that there is associated with that, and the biodiversity impacts right through to, you know, the collection of fabrics. The scenarios that were run, which included flax straw, recycled textiles, and tree pulp from a variety of places, Indonesia's peatlands, eucalyptus plantations there, boreal forest fiber. Recycled textiles came out clearly ahead from an environmental perspective. It was followed by agricultural residue. I think it was flax straw. And then at the very kind of worst performer was eucalyptus pulp from peatlands in Indonesia. So that really did account for those kinds of making sure that as much as you can within the LCA world, that it was an apples to apples comparison. But Patrick or Trisha or Dilip, is there anything that you'd add to
Yeah,
that?
I think, yeah, but I think the question is, I fully agree with you there that textile recycling is the right thing to do. It comes out as the least energy consuming, but also for us, at least at RenewCell, we only use renewable energies for our energy consumption. Then again, okay, we might be a little bit fortunate here in the Nordic, in Sweden, where we're located. We have a lot of hydropower. But I think it's also a responsibility of ours that we use renewable energy sources when we produce. So it's better with textile, I fully agree, but also that we should use renewable energy sources.
Yeah, I mean, for us at Lenzing, we use renewable energy in making our own pulp, the wood pulp. We're looking at where our footprint is. I think a lot of it comes down to those, where's the consumer waste coming from? Because this is the logistics that we've seen, and even when we've done the mapping with Accelerating Circularity Project, it's, you know, we need to work within a set area, and we can't be having waste from the United States and being processed in Europe and then being the fiber being shipped to Asia. I mean, this is what we need to look at. There's trade-offs with everything, without a doubt. But, you know, I think really when we look at, and this goes back to the supply network that I was talking about, how do we keep that tight in the circle?
Shannon, I think next question is probably okay.
Great, thank you all. Our next question is for all of you as well. Are there any collaborative efforts you're currently a part of that brands and retailers could join, and how could they go about joining?
I mean, that seems like a broad question, but there's collaborative, and there's so many of them going on right now. There's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I think, you know, also the resources that you have, Nicole, online can provide a lot of information. Accelerating Circularity Project, which is also expanding. Those are some that we're involved in. I know Textile Exchange is also looking at what can be done. Perhaps there's others that you want to comment on.
No, I think you covered the most important ones. The other collaborations are, of course, ongoing, is also with the brands and with our customers, and trying to help out to give them the recycled materials, because brands, in my view, are really trying to find and really trying to move into recycled textiles, but there's not enough. The technologies are not there just yet, and therefore, you know, I think the three of us, we have some technologies, but looking at the company, for example, like H&M, they do a lot. The Levi's do a lot. They're trying to, but they need more support, you know, and technologies to transition. And this also goes for cotton. You know, we're talking a little bit about viscose here and lyocell, but also cotton. Cotton is a horrible crop, actually. It's nice to wear, but horrible. And that's about 25 million tons additionally on top of the viscose. And we also need to have a look at, you know, what to do. And then you have the polyesters. It's pumping oil, and we're getting it through the value chain once, and then we're putting it on landfill or being incinerated. That's also a problem. So, I mean, in any way that we look at it, we need to have a lot more technologies, a lot more companies that are working in this space. Then, you know, it's a massive task, and it's going to take a few years. I'm quite worried about the years that we're going to get it done in 10. But overall, I think the consumers are looking for it, brands are looking for it. We need just to get it going.
And Dilip, anything for you?
I just would like to add a couple of things. See, there are two ways of collaborating. One is the industry-wide collaboration, which I think we referred to, but we can also customize collaboration. So I think if there is a specific issue, one can talk about it, and we can always tweak our process and technology to make sure that we can customize a solution to your needs. It depends upon what the context is, and I think let's have a dialogue.
I think that's one of the spaces that Canopy works in, because we're working with, you know, all of the major viscose producers. We're working with a pipeline of 25 different disruptive technology entrepreneurs. And so we're a little bit of a speed dater slash, like cheer squad slash pit crew to really trying to enable the best kind of combinations of brands being able to participate in pilots, helping to enable financing. Brands have an important role to play in that. And so if folks are wanting to and interested in any of that, both in terms of potentially signing on to the next generation vision or helping to enable investment in this space, then I know at Canopy would be very interested in working with folks on that.
Great, thank you. And in the interest of time, we'll take one more question, but we can follow up with our audience if we did not get to your question. And that question will be for all, but specifically mentions that, Trisha, you mentioned the industry needs to think more along the lines of a supply network. Some brands and retailers currently offer programs for consumers to drop off old clothing, but how do these efforts need to scale up to meet the demand of a circular supply chain?
So for the take back programs, I think this is where we have to look at where are they going, the collectors, the sorters. It's not that we can just take everything that's provided. Here again, designing into circularity, multi-fiber blends have been more of a trend the past, 5 to 8 years in developments. Also, we have to look at everything from sewing threads to labels and buttons and trims and everything else. So, I think these take back programs are wonderful. They're a great education tool, but that's only one part of it because we still have to look at how they're sorted and processed back into making pulp.
Thanks, Trisha. Did anyone else want to chime in before I hand it back to Nicole? Okay, great. Nicole, I'll hand it back to you for any closing statements.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Julie, and to the fabulous team at USFIA. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, and of course, to our fantastic panelists who are all leaders in actually making this somewhat ethereal sounding transition to a circular economy or next generation solutions actually a reality. So I think, a number of us have spoken to the fact that this is a turnaround decade for our own species, for humanity, as well as for the planet. And that can feel overwhelming. But I think what I feel really encouraged by is that this supply chain is at an inflection point. There is going to be a growth in production capacity over the next 3, 5, 8 years. And I think these conversations and the fact that next generation solutions are being prioritized will be absolutely critical in making sure that the supply chain is redirected to be fundamentally more sustainable and that we don't have new big mills being built in the middle of the Amazon or the boreal forest or Indonesia's peatlands, but instead these new mills are going to be sited near where there's a lot of waste textiles or agricultural residues and start to use those. And so that feels very exciting. We already have solutions on the market. Biela and Lenzing and Renewcell all have products on the market that are ready to be used, and with more support and utilization, that means that then the economy of scale of production improves, obviously. And so really it is now about scale. And I think that if COVID has taught us anything, it's highlighted the scale of change and how dramatic a change we are capable of actually realizing. And so it's with that spirit that I would just encourage all of us, recognizing that none of us can do this alone, but together when we're focused on outcomes and timely action, that I'm really confident that will be this time next year at the next World Circular Textile Day. I think we're going to have some pretty exciting progress to be able to report. So thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nicole, and to all of our speakers today. And as you can see on the screen, there's the contact information if you'd like to learn more, and that will also be included in our follow-up after the webinar today. Before we go, I just wanted to mention a special thank you to Lensing for sponsoring our Red, White, and What's New in Responsibly Made Fashion series. Next week, we have another exciting discussion on the report on the road to accelerating circularity. You can register at usfashionindustry.com, and we hope you'll join us then. As always, if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to USFIA directly by emailing us at info@usfashionindustry.com. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you at the next USFIA event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.